Namaskar. My name is Achint Agarwal. I'm an Indian. I live in India. And this is my reaction to a recent video published on YouTube by Prager University, which is titled somewhat like, "If You Live in a Free Country, Thank the British Empire." Now, to be honest, I watch Prager University videos often. I find them very informative and educating. But this one particular video, as an Indian, I found it abhorring. It was just horrible. Not because of the presentation. The presentation actually was pretty good, as it always is in their videos. But the facts, there weren't any facts. It was just a bunch of blatant lies. So in this video, I'll be presenting my commentary on that. And I would like to request you all to kindly watch that video by Prager University first. I'll put a link to that in the description below. Only when you watch that video will you be able to understand the context of what I'm speaking here. Now, the speaker, he begins by saying that the United States of America and Britain, mind you, he said Britain, not the British Empire. These two countries defended the ideals of democracy in two massive world wars. Now, my question is, one, what about the French? And what about the Soviets? They also made massive sacrifices for World War II, but the speaker simply neglects all the sacrifices by the French people and by the Soviets. And also, he mentions, as I said earlier, Britain and not the British Empire. During that time, almost all of the European nations, they had lots of colonies, and especially the British Empire was huge. And it is for a fact that Indians, the people of India, they comprised almost around 1/6 of the British Army, of the British military, and their contribution has simply been neglected. And not only of Indians, of all the colonies, of all the various African colonies, the colonies in Latin America. I also play a lot of video games on World War II, like Call of Duty, Battlefield, and I see that they only show Europeans. They never show people from the colonies in Asia, in Latin America, people of the people of India, people of Korea, of Mongolia, of Africa, of Brazil, etc., or Argentina. These people too, they participated in World War II, but their contribution is simply never shown. Now, the next point he says is that freedom was an Englishman's right, and wherever he went, he took that right with him. Now, if you notice, he over here says freedom is an Englishman's right, not a Britisher's right. So he's just undermining the other people of Britain, like the Scots, the Welsh, the Irish. And he goes on to give an example of some Mr. Stamford Raffles, who created the free market city-state of Singapore. No, Stamford Raffles simply established Singapore as a city. The free market city-state of Singapore was created by Lee Kuan Yew. It's like saying the financial hub that New York is today was established by the Iroquois. That's not true. Now, he goes on to say that the British believed that a final justification of their empire was a moral one. Well, of course, they always sought a justification for colonialism. That's why they created the Aryan invasion theory, which has been debunked completely. It is an utter lie, yet it still continued to be taught in schools in my country and in others. Because through this theory, they wanted to justify their oppression of the colonies, that they weren't oppressing the colonies, they were simply civilizing them. And through the Aryan invasion theory, they gave a historic basis to that, to justify. And then he goes on to say that they kept the peace, they created a sound and honest administration, and basic moral standards were honored. Now, first of all, the definition of morality is not absolute, contrary to what most people believe. In fact, moral values, they depend on a country's history, and they depend a lot on a country's geography, the climate, etc. We'll come to that later. But I'd like to give an example here. What about the case, he simply misses out the case of General Dyer. Now, this man, he opened fire to a group of innocent civilians in a place called the Jallianwala Bagh, And those citizens, they had gathered over there not to protest. They had simply gathered there as a peaceful gathering to discuss how to achieve freedom from the British. Now, they did not carry any arms. There were women and children in that place. And this man, General Dyer of the British Army, he opened fire on them. Many people were killed. All of them were innocent civilians, all of them unarmed. There were women and children too. And when the Queen of Britain, Queen Elizabeth, I'm not, oh, no, wait, why should I call her Queen Elizabeth? She's just, when she came to India and our Prime Minister, he took her there, she just shrugged as if those people were meant to be killed. Nothing could have been done. It was right to kill them. Till now, the British government has not, or the British royalty, has not issued any formal apology for that horrific event. Now, he goes on to say that the British did not try to nation build or to turn everyone into an Englishman. This is an utter lie, because we all know that Christian missionaries were extremely active during the colonial period in India's northeast and in India's south, that's in the Deccan Plateau. There are a lot of Christians today, mainly because their ancestors were converted by the Christian missionaries who came there with the sole purpose of converting people. They didn't do it to liberate them from any oppressions, etc. In fact, the oppressors were the British themselves. They simply came there to convert people and to well, basically create more Christians in the world. As Winston Churchill is very well known to have said, that the Indians, they are a barbaric people with a beastly religion. The British at that time, the British government, the British royalty, the British officials, they all thought that in fact, not only the British, most Europeans, they thought that every other religion except Christianity was beastly and barbaric. And they created this term known as the white man's burden, that it was a burden on the Europeans to civilize the people of the colonies, that whatever practices the colonies had, they were barbaric and that they had to be civilized. And they did this through Christianity, by missionaries, by converting them into Christianity. And by the way, there was a lot of backing by the Catholic Church for this. And when it comes to, the next thing, he talks about Gandhi, and he says that Gandhi himself said that I find that British government guarantees my freedom and governs me least of all. Again, a plain, blatant lie. Gandhi never said those words. In fact, as you all may know, Mahatma Gandhi was in fact one of the leaders of the Indian revolt for independence, the Indian struggle for independence. He was a pioneer of the non-violent movement, and he had many satyagrahas and protests to remove the British from India so that we could have Purna Swaraj, that is complete independence. And he goes on to say that it was the British Empire that abolished slavery. Well, he talks about how they poured money to abolish the slave trade, but he conveniently leaves out the condition of the indigo farmers in India. Have you noticed how there are a lot of people today, a lot of Indian people in many other countries of the world? In fact, anywhere you go, you'll find a lot of Indian people. That's a major reason for that is because Indians, especially people from poor villages, were taken to other countries forcefully. They were given false promises of a better future, and when they arrived, they saw the reality of their condition. They were kept in horrible conditions, given food that even animals would refuse to eat. And he also very easily neglects the Queen's drug trade in China. We all know that we all must have heard of the Opium War in China and how the entire nation of China under the Qing dynasty got addicted to opium. It was because the British government, and under royal decree by the Queen, in fact the royalty were the British monarch, she was actually getting profit from this drug trade. They sold opium and got a whole nation addicted to opium, leading to the loss of many lives. And he conveniently neglects it, saying that they abolished slavery. No, they didn't. Now he goes on to talk about a Pax Britannica. that is, keeping peace between previously warring tribes and religions. No, they didn't try to keep peace between warring tribes and religions. They tried to abolish other religions, and India is suffering because of that to this day, because of the missionaries in the northeast. The people who earlier were either Hindu, or that is, they practiced the Sanatan Dharma, the Indian Dharma, or people who were tribals. They were following their own tribal customs. Most of them were converted into Christianity, and till date, there's a problem in the Northeast because now many of them, or not many of them, but at least some of them, they want independence from India, and they want to establish a Christian nation, a Christian state. Whereas the best example of this is in the Indian state of Nagaland. Now, the word Naga, that's a Sanskrit word. These communities, there's a false notion that they were never a part of India. That's not true. These people were always an integral part of India. They came under the region known as Kamrup in ancient India. But now, because of the Christian missionaries, they think they're separate people. They're not. They're my people. They're my brothers and sisters. Now, he goes on to talk about how the British always tried to rule through local leaders. Again, a lie. In fact, the British introduced heavy taxes on the Indian people. In fact, the very system of heavy taxation was introduced by the British. The taxes by the British were the single reason why India, before the British, before the coming of the British, the Indian share of world GDP was 23%, and when the British left, it was less than 4%. This radical change was simply because of the excessive taxation. Because of the taxes, the indigenous industries in India, they were all destroyed. People became impoverished. And when it comes to ruling through local leaders, the best example is of Rani Lakshmi Bai of Jhansi, or the Rani of Jhansi as she is known. She did not have an heir, so she adopted a son. But the British did not accept that because there was a rule that if the local leaders, if the local rulers, if they did not have their own heir, that is, they did not have a son, then their area, their kingdom, would automatically go to the British. Is that what you call ruling through local leaders? That's blatant exploitation. Then, now coming back to morals, he talks about how the British were not multiculturalists, but rather had Judeo-Christian values, and they had a firm sense of right and wrong. Now, I'll make a distinction here. I'll be honest, I don't know much about Judaism because I've not read much about it, and also I won't comment on Judeo values because, well, I'm Indian, and we love Israel. Yep, India hearts Israel. So I'm going to primarily talk about Christian values. Now, there are many sects in Christianity, primarily 3 of them that most of you may be knowing. Catholics, Orthodox Christians, and Protestants. But in fact, these all came later on. The very first Christians were known as the Syriac Christians, primarily because they were from Syria, because the founder of Christianity, Yeshua of Nazareth, he was from Syria. Nazareth was a city in Syria during the Roman Empire. Now, these Syriac Christians, a lot of them, they came to India because, as a matter of fact, now the Catholic Church will protest against this and will deny this, but there is actual text in an ancient language known as Pali in present-day Ladakh in India, that Jesus Christ, Yeshua rather, during his adolescence, he actually came to India, and he was a disciple of one of the Bodhisattvas. He learned Buddhism, Jainism, and he learned the Sanatan Dharma. He learned from Indian rishis and munis, and from the Kashmiri Pandits, and he went back to try to spread this message, to spread this knowledge rather, because in the Indian Dharma, the Indian religion known as Sanatan Dharma, it doesn't have messages. It has questions. If you read the text, especially the Vedas, they're filled with debates. They don't give a they don't give an axiom like this is what it is. For example, Christianity is based on the axiom that Yeshua, Jesus Christ, he is the Son of God, and that he died because of the sins of everybody else. This is an axiom. Whereas the Indian religion, that is Sanatan Dharma, that is based on debates and questions about why do we exist, how do we exist, who created the universe, who or what created the universe, like that. Now, these Syriac Christians, they were living pretty peacefully in India, but then came the Catholics, and the Catholics considered these Syriac Christians as heathens, as pagans. So they were killed, and now there are very few, or maybe there aren't any Syriac Christians left in the world because they were killed by Catholics. So this notion that there are something known as Christian values, this is absolutely false. Christians have been killing other Christians. And another example is of the case of the so-called Saint Xavier. Now this guy was I think Portuguese. His name was Xavier. He was a priest, and he came to be known as Saint. Whereas all he did was he came to India, he slaughtered people by the thousands. That guy is a very bloody personality. He killed a lot of people, and because he killed non-Christian people, therefore the Catholic Church calls him a saint. Isn't this very similar to another peaceful religion that's been in the news for the past 20 years? I wonder where they got their ideas from in the first place. Now this is another important point. He talks about an individual called Charles Napier, who stopped the practice of sati. Sati was a horrible practice of widow burning, and he says that Charles Napier, he stopped it. No, he did not. The British, in fact, did very less to mess with the customs and traditions of the indigenous people in their colonies, because their primarily aim was trade and profit. You have to remember, the first Europeans to come to the colonies, or the first British, let's say, for example, the first British to come to India, they weren't British government officials. It was the East India Company. It was a private enterprise, and they came for trade. Now, after the revolt of 1857, India went into the hands of the British Crown, because the East India Company was bankrupt officially. So it was only then that they started to, let's say, interfere in the affairs. But even then, they wanted to keep their presence minimal, because you gotta understand, India is pretty haphazard. It's a pretty complex thing. It's a pretty complex nation. You can't just govern it so easily. Now, it wasn't Charles Napier that stopped sati. It was a man named Raja Ram Mohan Roy, who, through his efforts, brought down the practice of sati. He taught people why it's wrong, and he taught people that this thing never existed. This practice, it is not mentioned in any one of our texts. This practice came about because after the Muslim invasions to India, after the Arabs and the Persians and the Turks, they were invading, and the Central Asians, in fact, when they started invading India, they started raping a lot. So that's why when a soldier or when a king would die, the wives of those men, they would die with them. They would burn themselves so that they wouldn't be raped. Now, Charles Napier blames the so-called tradition of sati, on a Brahmin priest. That is unfair, because unfortunately it wasn't just practiced by the Brahmins. It was practiced by all members of the society, irrespective of what class they belonged to. And many a times, again, unfortunately, many women did it voluntarily, or many women would force other women to practice sati. Now, it was a very unfortunate practice, which has nothing to do with the Indian religion. It just came into being so that women could in a way, protect themselves from rape. I know it's wrong. Of course, I'm against it. But it wasn't a British man that brought an end to it. It was Raja Ram Mohan Roy. And that is why, even today, he's a very well-respected person. Oh, and for your kind information, the area where this was primarily practiced, it's now a state called Rajasthan. And currently, the chief minister of Rajasthan is a woman. Yes, her name is Vasundhara Raje. You can Google it up. So, as you can see, there has been a lot of progress made due to the efforts of Indian people, primarily Raja Ram Mohan Roy. Now, the speaker in the Prager University video goes on to talk about how the British Empire stood alone in mortal combat against the combined tyrannies of communism and Nazism. Again, it was not alone. When it comes to fighting Nazism, all of the Allied forces, including the colonies, were involved in the struggle against the Axis powers. People really neglect the role of the colonies in this. They had a major role to play. And it's not, you take any movie or any video game and people from the colonies are just neglected as if they didn't exist. There was a reason why those two wars were called the World Wars, not the European War, because a big part of the world was involved. Because of the huge empires of the Europeans, the colonies had a major contribution to it. And he goes to talk about a Magna Carta, the Magna Carta, which guarantees liberties. But again, these liberties were only for white people. As you can see, if you've read history, of course, American history, the African people or the black people, they were given rights and freedom pretty later, and even after they were given the right to speech and the right to vote, there was still a lot of discrimination. And he goes on to talk about how Britain is a liberty-loving country and how it's a great global guardian. Okay, Britain has made contributions to world peace. Yes, I'm not going to deny that, but no, it's not a great global guardian. Britain no longer, it's not a superpower, and it's not even one of the emerging superpowers. It's a stagnating country, especially after its exit from the EU, and its economy is really going down. And in fact, it is not Britain, but rather India that sends the maximum number of troops, that contributes the maximum number of troops to the UN peacekeeping forces. So India is actually a great global guardian. In fact, if you in the recent war, or not the war actually, in the recent kind of battle that was happening between Saudi Arabia and Yemen, it was India that had evacuated around 7,000 people, 4,000 of which were Indian citizens, and 3,000 of which were actually citizens of other countries. The Indian army had gone to evacuate them. The Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, he had called up both the Yemen and the Saudi Arabian governments, requesting them to cease their fire for a while so that innocent civilians of other nations could be evacuated. And in fact, when American citizens of the United States of America who were stuck there, when they contacted their embassy, what their embassy told them was, contact the Indian embassy and they will evacuate you. Now, I'm not saying that Britain hasn't made any contribution. I'm just saying it's not a great global guardian. It's not as great as it kind of wants to believe itself to be. It simply isn't. You can't just paint history with your own lies. Look, I'm not saying that, I'm not blaming colonialism on people born in Britain today. Of course, modern day British people have nothing to do with the atrocities of colonialism. They're absolutely innocent in all that. And it's not like that I hate modern day British people. Of course I don't. I really respect a lot of British people, like Dr. Richard Dawkins, the late Christopher Hitchens. I watch movies with British directors or British actors. Like one of my favorite directors is Christopher Nolan, who is also British. I love the Dark Knight trilogy. Who was Batman? Christian Bale. another British actor. I am in no way blaming the people of Britain today for what their ancestors did. And not even me, even the whole of India as a country, we're not asking for any reparations. We're not even asking for apologies for what your ancestors did. All we're saying is accept the fact that your ancestors were wrong. Accept it that what they did was morally wrong, not only according to the moral standards of today's world, but also of the moral standards of their time. What they did simply went against the moral values that they claimed to have. And that's all we're saying. Just accept the fact that your ancestors did something wrong. We're not asking for anything more. If we all just keep getting engrossed in our own egos, keep feeding our egos, keep telling lies, then there'll be a point when nothing that anybody says will ever make any difference. Words and actions will just become irrelevant if we just keep lying to each other. So all we're saying is, let's study the past with absolute honesty. Let's study it as it is. As it was, and let's just analyze our histories, and let's not lie to each other about it. Let's just study it. Let's just learn from our history so that we don't repeat those same mistakes. That's all we're saying. And I think if we do that, we can not only have a better documentation of our history, we can learn a lot from it. And as the very famous saying goes, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. We should thrive to. We've had a very bloody history. This is actually one of the most peaceful eras of humanity. Let's not repeat our history. Let's be truthful about it. So that's all I had to say. Dhanyawad. So if you enjoyed this video, I'm really this is a single-handed effort, so I know the video quality is subpar, the audio quality is subpar, and I really thank you for cooperating. But please do like and share this video if you enjoyed it. Thank you.